What if the British monarchy just declared war on Meghan Markle? Did the British monarchy just declare war on Meghan Markle? In a stunning development that has sent shockwaves through the corridors of Buckingham Palace and beyond, the House of Lords is now actively considering a move that would formally strip Meghan Markle of her royal titles. Once celebrated as the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan now stands at the center of a political and cultural firestorm, one that threatens to redefine not only her place in royal history but the very role of monarchy in modern times. And just when you thought the drama had reached its peak, Meghan has broken her silence. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. According to insiders, she isn't mincing words. "They're punishing me for telling the truth," she allegedly said. "I told my story, and now they want to erase me." That statement alone has ignited a fresh wave of debate, scrutiny, and emotional division, not just in Britain, but across the globe. At the heart of it is one simple but loaded question. Is Meghan Markle being held accountable for breaking with royal tradition? Or is she being targeted in a calculated act of revenge for daring to speak out? From her tell-all interview with Oprah Winfrey to the behind-the-curtain revelations in the Sussex's Netflix docuseries, Meghan has portrayed herself as a woman caught between royal protocol and personal truth. The palace, on the other hand, has maintained a dignified silence, or what critics call strategic stonewalling. Until now. The House of Lords debate changes everything. This is not a tabloid rumor or a vague whisper from an anonymous source. This is a formal government institution, entrenched in centuries of British tradition, preparing to vote on whether Meghan should be legally stripped of her royal styling and privileges. If passed, the motion would send a clear signal: there are consequences for challenging the crown. But what if that's exactly what Meghan wants? What if losing the title of Duchess of Sussex only elevates her image further, turning her into a modern-day martyr for personal freedom, racial justice, and feminist rebellion? Could this be the moment where she truly severs ties with the institution that once embraced her and then rejected her? The stakes are enormous. For Meghan, it's not just about a title. It's about legacy, identity, and the dangerous game of reputational power being played out on the world stage. For the monarchy, it's a battle to maintain control, preserve tradition, and prevent one of its former insiders from reshaping the narrative on her terms. Behind the public statements and diplomatic smiles, a brutal chess match is unfolding. And each move, each leaked quote, each strategic appearance, each political debate could determine the future of the crown and the fate of one of its most polarizing figures. So what exactly happened? How did the House of Lords arrive at this moment? And what does Meghan's defiant response really mean for the royal family, for British politics, and for the millions watching this saga unfold like a season of The Crown come to life? We're going to unpack the entire story, from the origins of the Duke and Duchess titles, to the behind-the-scenes tensions that erupted after Meghan and Harry's departure, to the calculated media strategies on both sides. We'll explore the personal cost of public truth-telling, the blurred line between personal narrative and political warfare, and why this may be the most consequential royal scandal of the 21st century. We'll also take a look at what insiders are saying. People who've worked with Meghan, people who've advised the palace, legal analysts, brand strategists, historians, and even members of parliament. You'll hear from voices on both sides. Those who say Meghan deserves to be stripped of her titles for exploiting the monarchy for profit, and those who believe this is yet another example of institutional cruelty dressed in the language of order and protocol. And make no mistake, this story isn't going away. In fact, it's just beginning to unravel. Because the moment Meghan decided to speak again, to accuse the monarchy of erasure, the stakes changed. No longer was this just about the past. It became about the future, what kind of monarchy Britain wants, and whether that monarchy can survive the scrutiny of a post-truth, influencer-driven, media-savvy world. In the coming chapters, we'll take you inside every corner of this unfolding drama. You'll see how a simple title, for words, Duchess of Sussex, became the symbol of a larger war. Not just a war between Meghan and the palace, but between old power and new power, between silence and storytelling, between history and rebranding. And if you're wondering whether this is personal, political, or performative, by the time we're done, you just might realize it's all three. To understand how we got here, you have to revisit the day Meghan Markle first entered the royal orbit. When Prince Harry introduced her to the world, the reaction was immediate and electric. A biracial American actress with a sharp mind and humanitarian background stepping into one of the oldest, whitest, most tradition-bound institutions on Earth? It was hailed as a modern fairy tale, a progressive turning point for a monarchy steeped in centuries of colonial baggage. The wedding was watched by millions. The image of Meghan walking herself down the aisle before being met halfway by Prince Charles was praised by some as symbolic, powerful, and quietly revolutionary. The monarchy, it seemed, was opening its gates. But behind the palace doors, things were far less poetic. Almost immediately, Meghan found herself on the receiving end of tabloid venom. Stories about avocado toast being somehow linked to environmental devastation. Brutally negative comparisons to Kate Middleton over trivial fashion choices. Paparazzi chasing her every move. Anonymous sources planting stories that painted her as a demanding diva. It was relentless. Harry, having grown up watching his mother Diana be hounded to death by the same press machine, was furious. He blamed the institution for not protecting his wife. Meghan, in interviews, would later say she was warned, "They're not going to protect you." Still, in those early months, she tried. Meghan took on royal duties with grace. She smiled at garden parties, posed beside heads of state, and launched charitable campaigns. But the tension never fully broke. If anything, it intensified. Every small mistake was amplified. Every effort was scrutinized. And every step she took away from tradition was treated like betrayal. Then came the big rupture. In January 2020, Meghan and Harry announced they would step back from their roles as senior royals. The press called it Megxit, blaming her for dragging Harry away from duty and country. But inside their own statement, the couple made it clear they wanted to carve out a progressive new role, still serving the Queen, but independently, without the suffocating control. The palace said no. What followed was a slow-motion uncoupling. The couple moved to Canada, then to California. They signed deals with Netflix and Spotify. They launched Archewell. Meghan suffered a miscarriage. They had another baby. And then, Oprah. That interview changed everything. Meghan alleged racism inside the royal family, admitting someone had raised concerns over Archie's skin color before he was born. She said her mental health plummeted and that she had asked for help, only to be turned away. The most haunting part? She said she no longer wanted to live. It was raw, devastating, and it shattered the carefully curated royal image. To some, Meghan became a hero, a woman who dared to speak her truth against a centuries-old system that silences and punishes women who step out of line. To others, she became a threat, an opportunist capitalizing on royalty while simultaneously tearing it down. And that is the root of the title controversy. Because even after leaving Britain, Meghan and Harry kept their titles. They were no longer working royals, but they remained the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. For the palace, this created an awkward tension. Could someone use royal branding to promote commercial products while publicly criticizing the monarchy? And for years, that tension simmered. But now, with the House of Lords stepping in, the issue is no longer symbolic. It's legislative. It's political. It's a statement. The motion is being driven by peers who argue that the Sussexes have exploited their titles for personal gain, damaging the integrity of the royal institution. Supporters of the move point to the Netflix documentary, the memoir Spare, and other branded content as examples of how the titles have been used as leverage, not for public service, but for private enrichment. On the other hand, critics say this is nothing more than an act of vengeance dressed in parliamentary robes. Meghan's defenders argue that she's being punished for telling inconvenient truths, that the motion isn't about titles at all, but about silencing her voice and discrediting her narrative. They say the monarchy wants to make an example out of her, to send a message to anyone else who might challenge its control. In that context, Meghan's quote, "They're erasing me," hits differently. It's no longer just about being removed from a family or losing a ceremonial title. It's about being stripped of legitimacy. It's about a system trying to rewrite history, one headline at a time. And Meghan knows how powerful perception is. She built a career on being seen. Now she's watching as that image is being reconstructed, without her consent. The timing couldn't be more volatile. With King Charles still relatively early in his reign, the monarchy is under intense scrutiny. The cost of living crisis has made royal spending more controversial. Younger generations are questioning the very relevance of the crown. Stripping Meghan of her title might play well with hardliners, but to a wider audience, it may look like retaliation. And yet, there is an undeniable irony here. Because while the establishment may believe it's punishing Meghan, it may be doing exactly the opposite. By casting her out officially, they may be giving her even more power, fueling her brand as a woman wronged. a truth-teller persecuted for daring to speak up. Which brings us to today, a moment of extraordinary reckoning. Not just for Meghan, but for the monarchy itself. Because what happens in the next few weeks, what's said, what's leaked, what's voted on could have ramifications that ripple far beyond the halls of Westminster or the gates of Windsor. This is no longer a personal feud. It's institutional warfare, and both sides are playing to win. The title Duchess of Sussex might sound like a fairy tale flourish to those outside the British Commonwealth, a symbolic adornment gifted as part of a royal wedding ceremony. But within the intricate and ancient machinery of the British monarchy, a royal title is anything but decorative. It carries history, power, identity, and, most critically, authority. So when the title is called into question, as it has been in the case of Meghan Markle, the implications stretch far beyond formality. They strike at the very heart of who belongs to the monarchy and who does not. To understand why this one title has become the center of a storm, we have to go back to the day it was first bestowed. On May 19, 2018, the world watched as Meghan Markle, a divorced American actress with a biracial background, walked down the aisle of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle to marry Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. The moment was steeped in both history and transformation. Queen Elizabeth II, exercising her royal prerogative, conferred upon Harry the title Duke of Sussex, and thus Meghan became Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. The title had not been used in over a century. The last Duke of Sussex, Prince Augustus Frederick, had been a progressive royal who opposed slavery and championed religious freedom, a fitting historical echo for a couple celebrated as symbols of a more modern monarchy. Meghan's title, then, was more than just a name. It was a brand, a signal of acceptance, a public commitment that she was part of the firm. And yet, beneath the polished veneer of the royal wedding lay years of protocol, politics, and unspoken expectations. The moment Meghan received her title, she was bound, not just ceremonially, but constitutionally. She was now a representative of the monarchy. Everything she did, wore, said, or even implied would reflect on the crown. This is what makes her royal title so complicated. It's not merely about status. It's about function. Royal titles come with an implied contract, loyalty, discretion, public duty, and strict adherence to tradition. Any deviation from that framework is not just discouraged, it's seen as dangerous. Which is why Meghan's transition from celebrated duchess to controversial figurehead was so fast, so jarring, and ultimately, so combustible. As Duchess of Sussex, Meghan was initially received with overwhelming enthusiasm by the public and media. Her first major solo engagement, opening the Oceania art exhibit at the Royal Academy, was heralded as graceful and poised. She became a patron of several charities, including the National Theatre and the Association of Commonwealth Universities. She even launched the Together cookbook to support the Hub Community Kitchen, a project aiding survivors of the Grenfell Tower fire. But it wasn't long before the glow began to fade. The same title that had been a symbol of progress now became a target. The British tabloid press turned. Headlines twisted even her most well-meaning actions into perceived slights against tradition. A hand placed protectively on her baby bump became an act of vanity. Her decision to wake at 5 a.m. and text staff ideas became tyrannical. The expectations surrounding the Duchess of Sussex were so rigid, so unforgiving, that no amount of grace or hard work could overcome them. Suddenly, the title began to feel like a cage. What made matters worse was the contrast with her sister-in-law, the Duchess of Cambridge. The media narrative pitted them against each other, framing Meghan as the disruptive outsider and Kate as the dutiful royal. It was an unfair and artificial dichotomy, but it stuck, and it reinforced the idea that Meghan, for all her efforts, didn't fit the mold expected of someone with a royal title. And then, of course, came the departure. In January 2020, Meghan and Harry stunned the world by announcing their intention to step back from senior royal duties. They expressed a desire to carve out a progressive new role while still supporting the Queen. But the palace's response was swift and firm. You cannot be half in, half out. You are either inside the institution or you're not. And so, while they were permitted to retain their Duke and Duchess titles, they were barred from using the style HRH, His Royal Highness, in any official capacity. This compromise created a uniquely strange situation. Meghan was still the Duchess of Sussex, but she could not use the full styling typically associated with her station. It was like holding the key to a room you were no longer allowed to enter. A title with boundaries. A name without access. This dual status lingered uncomfortably in the years that followed. As the couple relocated to California and launched Archwell, as they signed deals with Netflix and Spotify, as they gave interviews and released content critical of royal life, the presence of the title remained a point of contention. Was Meghan using her title to boost her commercial endeavors? Was the Duchess brand being monetized in ways that undermined the dignity of the monarchy? Supporters argued that she had earned the title by marriage, and if the palace didn't want her to use it, they should have formally removed it. Others saw it differently, claiming that every appearance as the Duchess of Sussex was a subtle exploitation of royal prestige for private gain. The House of Lords debate, years in the making, brought this question to a boil. For months, pressure had been building. Conservative peers argued that the monarchy's credibility was being damaged by association. Meghan's Netflix series, they said, had crossed a line, offering an insider exposé while still carrying the weight of a royal title. Her memoir contributions and public comments about racism, mental health, and institutional failure within the monarchy, though framed as personal truth, were viewed by some as an assault on the crown's integrity. To these critics, stripping the Duchess of Sussex title was not just a disciplinary action, it was a matter of safeguarding the monarchy's moral center. Yet the defenders of Meghan's title saw something very different. They saw a woman who had been brought into a centuries-old institution, subjected to immense public and private pressure, and then vilified for choosing her mental and emotional health. They saw an act of cultural punishment, a way of silencing and shaming a woman who dared to reject the status quo. And they pointed out that other royals had retained their titles despite scandal, including Prince Andrew, whose connections to Jeffrey Epstein triggered far more legal and ethical scrutiny. So why, they asked, was Meghan's title the one under siege? That question has no easy answer. But it reveals a deeper truth about how titles function in Britain, not merely as ceremonial designations, but as battlegrounds for politics, power, and perception. The title of Duchess of Sussex is no longer just a formal label. It is a symbol, a trigger, a weapon, a burden. And now, with the House of Lords moving toward formal action, that title stands on the edge of extinction. The very thing that once promised belonging now marks the border of expulsion. And as Meghan watches this process unfold from California, surrounded by legal teams, publicists, and a growing community of supporters, one thing is certain, she's not giving it up quietly. She knows what that title means to her, to the monarchy, and to the millions who have followed her journey from actress to duchess to controversial icon. She knows that if they take the title, they aren't just removing words from her name. They're trying to erase the idea that she ever belonged in the first place. And if that's the message they're sending, she's already crafting her reply. If the British monarchy's power has long rested in symbolism and tradition, the House of Lords just lit a political fuse that could blow those foundations wide open. The motion to strip Meghan Markle of her royal titles, proposed, debated, and now poised to advance, did not come from a palace directive or a royal decree. It came from within the heart of Britain's legislative body, signaling a shift from family feud to national concern. It wasn't a whisper behind palace gates. It was read aloud in a room with red leather benches and echoes of empire, where peers in robes spoke not as gossipers, but as lawmakers. For those who saw Meghan's role as merely tabloid fodder, the gravity of this moment hit hard. This was no longer just about public opinion or media outrage. This was Parliament stepping into the royal arena, and doing so with the intent to make her title a matter of law. The motion itself, initially raised by a group of conservative peers, called for an official review of how royal titles are retained or revoked, particularly when a title holder is no longer performing public duties or is perceived to have brought the monarchy into disrepute. But the language in the debate, especially when it turned to Meghan specifically, was anything but diplomatic. One peer stood and said bluntly, "The Duchess of Sussex has repeatedly used her association with the royal family to criticize the very institution that granted her status. This is not compatible with the responsibilities or dignity of a peerage title." Another described Meghan and Harry's Netflix series as a carefully curated attack on the monarchy dressed up as a documentary, and accused the couple of leveraging royal privilege for commercial gain while biting the hand that fed them. The chamber was divided, not along simple party lines, but across deeper ideological trenches. On one side were those who believed titles must reflect service and loyalty. On the other were those who feared the motion would set a dangerous precedent, punishing dissent with erasure. And yet, For all the legal phrasing and historical references tossed around the chamber, the undertone was clear. Meghan Markle had touched a nerve, deep, enduring, and institutional. The fact that the motion didn't come directly from Buckingham Palace only intensified the drama. The monarchy traditionally remains neutral in matters of parliament. Yet, anyone familiar with royal operations knows the palace watches closely, often steering political waves quietly behind the curtain. Insiders suggest there had been informal conversations between senior courtiers and government figures aimed at gauging appetite and shaping outcomes without direct involvement. But this time, the House of Lords didn't need a royal push. The momentum came from years of escalating tension, sparked by the Oprah interview, fueled by the Netflix series, and inflamed by Meghan's continual framing of her time within the royal family as traumatic, silencing, and discriminatory. Supporters of the motion argued that this wasn't just about Meghan as a person. It was about protecting the institution itself. They pointed out that the monarchy is constitutionally fragile. It exists not through force but through perception, through the belief that it represents unity, stability, and moral high ground. And if someone bearing the title of Duchess spends years publicly criticizing the institution, that belief begins to fracture. To them, stripping Meghan of her title wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. But critics saw the move differently. They saw a group of elite lawmakers, many of whom have hereditary titles themselves, using legislative tools to punish a woman who had done what no other royal dared to do. Speak plainly. What exactly are we debating here? One crossbench peer asked. The revocation of a ceremonial title, or the criminalization of honesty? That quote made headlines the next day, and for good reason. It got to the core of the controversy. Because while the motion was framed as a matter of protocol and propriety, it was impossible to separate it from the raw emotion underlying it. Meghan had accused the royal institution of systemic racism, mental cruelty, and calculated neglect. Her words didn't just hurt feelings, they threatened reputations, legacies, and a global brand built on dignity and tradition. The question the House of Lords was now being forced to confront was whether the title of Duchess of Sussex could coexist with the growing narrative Meghan had presented to the world. Could someone simultaneously hold a royal title and act as a whistleblower against the very system that title represents? And if not, who decides when the line is crossed? Several legal scholars were brought in to provide context. They noted that while the Queen or King technically grants titles, Parliament retains certain legislative powers that can influence how and when those titles can be regulated, especially if they are peerage-based. The sovereign is unlikely to act unilaterally. Stripping a title is not done lightly, but if Parliament leads, the palace may follow. And here lies the quiet danger. If the motion gains traction and is passed in the House of Lords, the pressure on King Charles to act will become almost unbearable. Refusing to follow through would be seen as weakness. Accepting it would be a definitive act of rejection toward his own son's wife. The fallout either way could be seismic. Meanwhile, the public watched from the sidelines with growing intensity. Clips from the Lords' debate circulated on social media, with some users mocking the elite for fretting about titles while people struggle to afford groceries, while others applauded the peers for defending the crown against exploitation. One tweet that went viral read, "This isn't about Meghan. It's about who gets to tell the story of the monarchy and who gets punished for it." And therein lies the truth that many peers were unwilling to say out loud. Meghan Markle is not just a person. She is a narrative threat. She doesn't just speak. She reframes. She shifts power from institutions to individuals, from silence to storytelling, from restraint to raw truth. And that is far more dangerous to the monarchy than a scandal or an affair or a financial misstep. The motion, while still under review, has already served one purpose. It has made the struggle visible. It has shown that Meghan's existence as Duchess of Sussex is not a passive title. It is a battlefield. Every appearance she makes, every podcast she records, every article that references her Duchess status becomes a skirmish in a larger war over who gets to define royalty. In interviews since the motion was raised, anonymous sources close to Meghan say she feels betrayed, not because the title is at risk, but because the very people who once welcomed her are now using institutions to erase her. She's not mourning the loss of the title, one insider said. She's mourning the lie she was told, that this family would be different. For the palace, this moment is both a test and a trap. Support the motion, and they reinforce accusations of being punitive, racist, and fragile. Reject it, and they risk continued erosion of public trust in their authority and relevance. For a monarchy already facing generational fatigue, either option could prove damaging. So what happens next? The House of Lords will continue to debate. Committees may be formed. Public commentary will shape the tone of political response. And behind closed doors, Buckingham Palace will strategize every syllable. Because even if Meghan loses the title, she gains a new badge. One that says, "I told my truth, and this is what they did to me." And in a world dominated by platforms, content, and virality, that kind of story might just be more powerful than any Duchess title ever was. The moment word leaked from the House of Lords that Meghan Markle's title might be on the chopping block, there was silence from Montecito. But it didn't last long. Within 48 hours, the silence was broken, not through a formal statement, not through a palace rebuttal, but through a carefully crafted leak from someone close to the Duchess herself. She told her truth, and now they're trying to erase her, the anonymous source revealed to a U.S. outlet known to be sympathetic to Meghan. It was a sentence laced with defiance, betrayal, and warning. What followed was a cascade of strategic responses that made it abundantly clear Meghan wasn't going to go down quietly. In fact, she wasn't going down at all. Unlike traditional royals who often rely on spokespersons and carefully filtered press briefings, Meghan's team operates differently. She doesn't respond immediately. She responds deliberately. Her network of allies, publicists, journalists, activists, Hollywood friends, began dropping breadcrumbs. She wasn't just hurt. She was enraged. And that fury was not only personal, it was political. Inside her inner circle, sources say Meghan felt the move from the House of Lords was less about protocol and more about revenge. She believed it was punishment for daring to speak out, first in the Oprah interview, then in the Netflix series, and more recently through quiet but consistent advocacy work. The timing of the Lords' motion, she noted, came just months after her podcast touched on institutional gaslighting. To her, the connection was obvious. She took on the monarchy and won in the court of public opinion, said one confidant. Now they're trying to claw back their dignity by stripping her of a title they know carries symbolic weight. But what Meghan did next turned the narrative on its head. She didn't play the victim. She leaned into control. Within days, her legal team was reportedly assessing the constitutional validity of the House of Lords motion. Could the government really pressure the monarch to strip her title without violating due process or established precedent? Could such a move be interpreted as a breach of civil rights? And perhaps more crucially, would it expose the monarchy to further scrutiny in international courts of opinion? Sources suggest Meghan's team wasn't just reacting. They were preparing for escalation. A top-tier public relations strategist, who has worked with her before, said, "They're building a counter-narrative, not just to stop the title from being removed, but to make it clear that doing so would have consequences reputationally, globally, and perhaps even legally." One of the first signs came through a subtle but unmistakable message. Meghan was photographed leaving a private meeting with members of a major mental health foundation in Los Angeles. She smiled, posed with staff, and spoke about the importance of courage in the face of systemic adversity. No names were mentioned, but the subtext was unmistakable. And then came the quotes. Not in a press release, but in carefully placed stories in U.S. publications with vast digital reach. "She's disappointed but not surprised," read one. "This only proves her point," read another. "The institution never wanted her there to begin with," declared a third. These weren't random leaks. They were calibrated emotional beats, crafted to show Meghan as the outsider who had been invited and only to be later punished for not staying silent. At the same time, another shift was occurring. Prominent voices in the media began to rally behind her. Oprah Winfrey's team, though officially silent, hinted through surrogates that Meghan had anticipated a pushback like this from day one. Gayle King, a known ally, remarked during a broadcast that some people don't like women who stand up for themselves, especially when they challenge power. Serena Williams posted a cryptic Instagram story with the phrase, "They fear what they cannot control." The timing wasn't subtle, but perhaps the most telling reaction came from Prince Harry. While he made no public statement, his absence from royal engagements that followed the motion was noted. Multiple commentators pointed out that Harry had always been fiercely protective of Meghan. If the monarchy thought they could separate the title from the woman without consequence, they were wrong. Because in Harry's mind, an attack on Meghan's title was an attack on Meghan herself, and by extension, on their shared decision to leave. And yet, even amid the fury and fire, Meghan appeared calm in public. Photographed taking Archie to school, shopping with friends, attending a board meeting. Her demeanor showed no visible sign of the political war unraveling across the Atlantic. That, too, was part of the strategy. She was unbothered, regal, even without a crown. But privately, those close to her say Meghan was grappling with deep emotions, anger, yes, but also exhaustion. Not at the idea of losing the title, but at the recurring pattern. She's damned if she speaks, damned if she stays quiet, one friend explained. If she calls out racism or hypocrisy, she's accused of being ungrateful. If she says nothing, they strip her of status. She's navigating an impossible tightrope. And still, Meghan chose to keep walking it. As the House of Lords moved the motion into committee review, Meghan's team began laying the groundwork for a counteroffensive not in courts, but in public perception. The plan wasn't to beg for the title. It was to make it clear that its removal would only reinforce her central claim that the monarchy is more interested in control than compassion. In behind-the-scenes meetings, Meghan reportedly expressed frustration not just with the motion, but with the double standard it exposed. "Why is my title under review while Prince Andrew still holds his?" she asked, according to one insider. What message does that send about accountability? It's a powerful question, one that hit headlines immediately after it surfaced, because it highlights the contradictions inside the very institution trying to discipline her. Andrew was stripped of military affiliations and public duties, yes, but he remains a prince. Meghan, who has not been accused of any crime or misconduct, only of speaking truthfully about her experience, is facing full title revocation. The optics are devastating. In the court of public opinion, that contrast could not be starker. As support for Meghan grew online, international voices began to weigh in. American journalists framed the issue as an attack on free speech. Human rights advocates hinted at racial undertones. Even European royals reportedly viewed the move with quiet discomfort. A Spanish royal expert noted on live TV, "You can't say you're a modern monarchy while silencing the only biracial duchess you've ever had." By the end of that week, Meghan's image was no longer just that of a disgraced royal. It was morphing into something more potent, a woman of principle standing up to a vengeful system. And she was winning. Petitions circulated online demanding that her title be protected. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag stand with Meghan. Hashtag not your scapegoat. Hashtag erased by the crown. Activists and celebrities released coordinated statements of support. Within a matter of days, the motion to strip her of her title had become a public relations liability for the very monarchy it was meant to protect. Yet through all of it, Meghan never released a direct statement. She didn't sit for an interview or publish a memoir rebuttal. Instead, she let the narrative swell organically around her. That silence, that restraint, it was the loudest response of all. Because Meghan knows the monarchy thrives on control, on keeping order, on punishing rebellion. And by refusing to beg, by refusing to fight on their terms, she was doing something far more radical. She was reminding them that her identity does not come from their approval. And no act of parliament, no vote in the Lords, no whispered campaign of erasure could ever take that away. If there was one decision that marked the turning point in Meghan and Harry's relationship with the monarchy, it wasn't the Oprah interview. It wasn't the announcement that they would be stepping back from royal duties. It wasn't even the legal battles with the British press. It was Netflix. The moment the ink dried on that multi-million-dollar deal, everything changed. To the outside world, the Netflix partnership seemed like a natural progression for the couple. Here were two globally recognized figures, freshly liberated from royal constraints, with powerful stories to tell. The public expected inspirational content, maybe a documentary series about mental health, some heartwarming programming for children, or a historical series highlighting unsung heroes. What they got instead was something far more intimate and infinitely more explosive. Harry and Meghan, a 6-part docu-series that laid bare their version of life behind palace gates. The series didn't just rattle royal feathers, it detonated them. The show began with soft tones and personal reflections. Their courtship, the press attention, their desire to do good. But it quickly pivoted into something else entirely. A highly polished, emotionally charged indictment of how the monarchy had, in their words, failed to protect them, manipulated media narratives, and stifled their independence. The series was unflinching in its portrayal of the royal institution as cold, hierarchical, and tone-deaf. Clips of Princess Diana's funeral were shown in tandem with images of paparazzi chasing Meghan through New York. A security expert recalled the threats made against her life. Harry explained how certain members of his family had an unconscious bias that made them blind to Meghan's experiences. Meghan, for her part, detailed the moment she broke down, crying on the floor, saying she no longer wanted to live, and claimed that help was denied. The show didn't just tell their story. It reframed it. And to many watching, it felt like the monarchy wasn't just being criticized. It was being dismantled, piece by piece, in full cinematic clarity. From a production standpoint, the Netflix series was a masterstroke. It blended home footage with high-gloss interviews, journal entries, and previously unreleased texts. It made the Sussexes relatable. It positioned them as the protagonists of a battle for truth and healing, up against an institution that still valued silence over survival. Viewers around the world, especially in the US, were captivated. They sympathized. They reposted. They rallied. But inside the palace, reactions were very different. According to sources familiar with court operations, the release of the series was viewed not as a documentary, but as an act of war. The monarchy had no ability to respond formally. They could not fact-check in real time, nor could they present their own version of events without violating their commitment to discretion. In the press, headlines erupted. Harry and Meghan burn the bridge, royals blindsided by Netflix bombshells, and the crown fights back with silence. Behind the scenes, however, it was anything but silent. Courtiers scrambled to manage the fallout. Aides reportedly warned King Charles that the series could permanently damage the royal family's image among younger generations. William, said to be furious over his portrayal, refused to watch it, but made clear to his inner circle that lines had been crossed. Camilla, described in the series only in passing, was still caught in the collateral damage. And Kate Middleton, once seen as the monarchy's quiet peacemaker, was suddenly under a different kind of spotlight, one that exposed, rather than celebrated, her silence. But it wasn't just the content of the series that made it so inflammatory. It was the fact that Meghan and Harry did it while still holding royal titles. To royal traditionalists, that was the unforgivable offense. They weren't just speaking out. They were speaking out as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Every title card, every media interview, every production credit reinforced their royal link. Even if they never claimed to represent the crown, their titles lent them an aura of authority that gave their words weight. And in the eyes of many, that weight was weaponized. This is where the debate inside the House of Lords found fuel. Peers cited the Netflix series as proof that Meghan had monetized her title while attacking the very institution that bestowed it. They argued that by retaining the Duchess of Sussex designation, she blurred the line between insider and outsider, reaping the benefits of royal branding WH. But supporters of Meghan pointed out a glaring inconsistency. If the monarchy had wanted to fully sever ties, they could have revoked the titles when Meghan and Harry stepped down in 2020. Instead, they allowed a hybrid status to exist, perhaps out of compromise, perhaps out of caution. That ambiguity, critics say, created the very conditions now being weaponized against her. And yet, even as the backlash swirled, Meghan appeared unfazed. In public, she framed the series not as revenge, but as reclamation. "No one ever asked me how I felt," she said in one of the episodes, eyes glistening but voice calm. "So I'm telling you now." Her tone throughout the series was measured, not angry, but resolute. She wasn't shouting. She was documenting. And documentation, in today's world, is power. Because the Netflix series did more than tell a story, it cemented a legacy. It gave Meghan a platform that couldn't be edited by royal courtiers or softened by press officers. It gave her an audience that stretched far beyond the Commonwealth. And it gave her what every public figure craves: control over the narrative. For the monarchy, that was the nightmare scenario. Not because Meghan's story was unique, but because it was believable. She didn't claim to be perfect. She admitted her mistakes. She owned her ambition. But she also exposed the machinery, the rigid expectations, the invisible rules, the silent punishments that define royal life. And in doing so, she made herself both a target and a mirror. A target, because institutions loathe those who expose their workings. A mirror, because her story forced the monarchy and Britain to confront uncomfortable truths about race, gender, and privilege in the modern age. Yet, even now, years after the series aired, the consequences continue to ripple. The House of Lords motion referenced the Netflix deal repeatedly. It framed the documentary not as art or expression, but as a political act. An act that violated the unwritten agreement between the Crown and its representatives. It was the series, more than any interview or speech, that reignited calls for title revocation. And Meghan knows it. Sources close to her say she's unapologetic. She sees the series as a necessary chapter, not for publicity, not for profit, but for survival. It was her way of reclaiming her voice in a space that had tried to silence it. It was a statement. You may have given me the title, but you don't own my story. What makes this even more complicated is that the public was split. Some viewers saw the Netflix series as narcissistic, an attempt to control public perception with selective editing and curated vulnerability. Others viewed it as a cathartic unmasking of a centuries-old system that has crushed women before. What's undeniable is its impact. The series reshaped how millions perceive the royal family. It became a global talking point, and it elevated Meghan again now. Not as a royal, but as a voice, a narrator, a truth-teller. That's what makes the current motion to strip her title so incendiary. Because it doesn't just remove a ceremonial designation. It suggests that her version of events, the one documented in high definition, streaming on the world's largest platform, is invalid. That by speaking out, she crossed a line not of protocol, but of power. And in the world Meghan now occupies, that accusation won't be met with silence. In fact, it might lead to another season. If the Netflix series was the opening salvo in Meghan and Harry's narrative offensive, the memoirs that followed were the heavy artillery. And though it was Prince Harry's spare that bore his name on the cover, Meghan's fingerprints were all over the emotional architecture of that book. Together, they had written a story not just to remember, but to reshape history. The release of Spare in early 2023 marked a moment unlike any other in recent royal history. The last time a senior member of the royal family had written such a personal, emotionally raw, and politically charged memoir was never. Royal memoirs have existed before, but never from a prince still alive, still bearing a title, still a heartbeat away from the throne's inner circle. The bombshells were not just shocking, they were unprecedented. Harry's voice dominated the pages, yes. But time and again, readers saw Meghan's experience through his lens. Her pain, her struggles, her marginalization were central themes. She was not just the subject of a few chapters, she was the catalyst of his awakening. And that made her both the heart of the book and the lightning rod for its most controversial claims. Chapter after chapter painted a picture of a royal institution hostile to difference, addicted to control, and incapable of real emotional connection. Harry described Meghan's introduction to the royal household not as a warm embrace, but as a slow-motion ambush. He detailed how certain senior royals dismissed her concerns, how palace aides spread false stories, how relationships soured behind a facade of civility. And the revelations didn't stop there. Harry wrote of a screaming match with his brother William, of physical confrontations, of being ordered not to defend Meghan publicly during tabloid frenzies. He described a family more concerned with headlines than happiness. But it was the parts about Meghan that triggered the most backlash and behind the scenes, the fiercest resentment. One passage described Meghan sobbing on the floor after being subjected to what Harry called systemic cruelty by both the palace and the press. Another claimed a senior royal made a racially insensitive remark about Archie's skin tone. And still another, Harry accused palace staff of conspiring to isolate and discredit Meghan after she voiced concerns about her mental health. The book didn't just tell their story. It burned the bridge behind them. Inside Buckingham Palace, the reaction was immediate and visceral. While there was no official rebuttal, just as there hadn't been after the Netflix series, courtiers began subtly shifting their public strategies. Quiet leaks painted Harry as fragile and manipulated, Meghan as ambitious and divisive. The press followed suit, framing the couple's revelations as exaggerated grievances. But the damage had already been done. Spare sold over 1.4 million copies on its first day in the US, UK, and Canada combined. Within a week, it became the fastest-selling nonfiction book in history. The British public was polarized. Some were horrified by the emotional transparency. Others applauded it. But no one could ignore it. And at the center of it all was the Duchess of Sussex. She may not have been the author, but she was undeniably the protagonist. Critics of the monarchy seized upon the memoir to question the crown's moral compass. How, they asked, could the institution treat Meghan with such suspicion and scorn, while maintaining silence on far graver scandals elsewhere within the royal circle? Why was her desire to be heard seen as a threat? Why was she continually punished for surviving? Inside Parliament, these conversations gained traction. Though not officially part of the House of Lords' motion to remove Meghan's title, Spare was cited in numerous debates as evidence of the couple's persistent undermining of royal dignity. Phrases like betrayal, disgrace, and reputational harm were used without hesitation. Supporters of the motion argued that allowing Meghan to retain the Duchess of Sussex title after the memoir's publication was like rewarding treason with a medal. They claimed that Spare crossed every red line of royal conduct and set a dangerous precedent for the future. But Meghan's defenders had another view entirely. They saw the book as a deeply personal account of trauma and alienation. They argued that Spare wasn't a political grenade, it was a cry for understanding. That Harry, speaking from the unique vantage point of being both insider and outsider, was not dismantling the monarchy, but begging it to evolve. More pointedly, they questioned why Meghan was being singled out. If Harry wrote the memoir, why was her title on the chopping block? Why was she, yet again, bearing the brunt of backlash for words she didn't write? The answer, many believed, had less to do with protocol and more to do with power, and with the monarchy's discomfort with the woman who had forced it to look in the mirror. In private, Meghan reportedly saw Spare as both a risk and a necessity. Friends close to her say she was nervous about the book's release, not because of what it might reveal, but because of how it might be twisted. She knew that every quote about her, every anecdote of pain, would be reinterpreted to fit a narrative she couldn't control. But she supported Harry fully. And according to several insiders, she helped shape the memoir in ways that weren't obvious but were undeniably present. She guided the tone, one publishing source revealed. She reminded Harry to center truth over revenge. She wasn't interested in retaliation, she was interested in record-keeping. The distinction is important. Meghan has always framed her public interventions not as attacks, but as necessary acts of honesty. When asked why she continues to speak out, her answer has been consistent. Because silence is the monarchy's greatest weapon. And I refuse to be complicit. The memoir extended that ethos to the page. And now, as the House of Lords reviews the motion to strip her title, the book remains a major point of contention. For some, it is the last straw. For others, it is the evidence of why such punishment would be unjust. Meghan, meanwhile, remains steadfast. She's never formally responded to Spare. She's never done a follow-up interview, never published her own memoir. The rumors persist that one is being written. What she has done is move forward. She's continued her advocacy, joined the boards of philanthropic organizations, and even launched new ventures under the Archewell umbrella. But behind closed doors, those close to her say she is watching the fallout carefully. Because she knows what's really at stake isn't just a title. It's credibility. It's voice. It's the right to tell your story, even if it contradicts the institution that gave you a name. The memoirs, particularly Spare, have put that right under a spotlight. They have forced the British establishment to confront the question it's long avoided. What happens when the people inside the palace walls stop playing by the script? It was the interview that rewrote the royal media playbook. On March 7, 2021, nearly 2 years after stepping away from royal duties, Meghan and Harry sat down with Oprah Winfrey in a garden shaded by palm trees and lit by the soft sun of Southern California. The image was calm, almost serene. But what unfolded in the next 2 hours was anything but peaceful. What they unleashed in that interview would ignite an international firestorm and lay the foundation for the ongoing war of narratives that now defines their public life. The atmosphere was deceptively gentle, Meghan in a black Armani dress embroidered with lotus blossoms, Oprah leaning forward with concern, Harry eventually joining. But beneath the soft visuals was a current of betrayal, trauma, and confrontation that exploded in real time. It began subtly. Meghan spoke about adjusting to royal life, learning protocols not from palace aides but from Googling them. She mentioned how isolating it had been to live under constant press scrutiny while being denied access to personal support. But then she dropped a sentence that would stop hearts around the world. I just didn't want to be alive anymore. Silence. Oprah blinked. The camera stayed still. Meghan didn't flinch. She explained how she had approached royal officials for help, begging for mental health support, only to be told it wouldn't look good. She said she was told her status, her title, her position, came with expectations of resilience, not requests for aid. It was a chilling revelation, one that painted the palace not as a protective institution, but as an indifferent machine concerned more with optics than with the well-being of its own. But Meghan wasn't finished. At one point in her pregnancy with Archie, she revealed, unnamed members of the royal family had concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be. The implication was unmistakable. Racism wasn't just present in the press, it was embedded within the institution itself. The fallout was immediate and volcanic. Newsrooms exploded. Pundits scrambled. Viewers around the globe were split. Some called Meghan courageous for speaking her truth. Others accused her of exaggeration, manipulation, or even fabrication. The monarchy issued a carefully worded response. Recollections may vary, but the issues raised were taken very seriously. For Meghan, that one interview had broken a sacred rule: royal silence. In the royal family, grievances are meant to be dealt with internally. Image is everything. Emotions, especially messy ones, are seen as dangerous. But Meghan had turned that rule inside out. She aired the institution's dirty laundry on one of the world's most watched platforms, and she did so with composure, evidence, and conviction. In doing so, she seized back the narrative. That moment redefined her public identity. She was no longer just the Duchess of Sussex. She became a whistleblower, a truth-teller, a woman who refused to suffer quietly. But that transformation came at a cost. From that point on, Meghan was viewed by the monarchy not as a former member who had respectfully stepped away, but as an ongoing threat. The Oprah interview had placed her permanently on the outside, and yet she still wielded influence, headlines, and global sympathy. For the crown, this was uncharted territory. Traditionally, royal narratives are tightly controlled. Press briefings are carefully managed. Stories are coordinated. But Meghan, speaking outside the system, flipped that model. She understood the power of modern media, not just as communication, but as combat. And her weapon of choice wasn't rage, it was testimony. What followed the Oprah interview was a tightening of ranks within the royal institution. Public engagements became more scripted. William and Kate were sent on high-profile goodwill tours. Palace sources began quietly briefing reporters, hoping to refocus public attention on royal duties rather than drama. But Meghan's voice had already changed the game. And she didn't stop there. Later in 2022, she launched a new podcast series titled Archetypes on Spotify, designed to challenge the labels that hold women back. The concept was elegant but sharp. Dissect terms like diva, ambitious, difficult, and bitch, words often used to demean women, especially those who dare to speak up or lead. In one episode, she recounted how she'd been labeled difficult after joining the royal family, despite working tirelessly behind the scenes to advance charity initiatives and reform archaic protocols. Another episode featured an open discussion on the tension between strength and likability in public life. Her conversations with Serena Williams, Mariah Carey, Mindy Kaling, and other high-profile women added both celebrity power and depth. The podcast was personal, introspective, political, and once again, it enraged the establishment. Because even though Archetypes wasn't explicitly about the royal family, its subtext was clear. Meghan was drawing from her own experience inside an institution that had branded her, diminished her, and ultimately discarded her. She never said the palace, or the queen, or Kate, but the implications hovered behind every syllable. Critics called it a self-serving platform for grievance. Supporters saw it as a masterclass in narrative ownership. Either way, the result was the same. Meghan controlled the story, and that control terrified the monarchy. Historically, royal family members have depended on the British press to shape their image. They attend engagements, smile for photos, and trust that palace comms will smooth over any public missteps. Meghan blew that model apart. She created her own distribution channels, Oprah, Spotify, Netflix, and used them not to promote sanitized goodwill, but to explain the cost of silence. That's why the current motion in the House of Lords feels like more than protocol. It feels like retaliation. Meghan didn't break the rules of royal engagement. She rewrote them. And in doing so, she exposed the vulnerabilities of a system that has long survived on secrecy and suppression. In that light, the question isn't whether Meghan deserves to lose her title. The question is whether the monarchy can survive someone who no longer needs it. Because every time Meghan speaks, whether through Oprah, Archetypes, or documentary interviews, she proves the same point. The crown cannot control her. Not her image, not her words, not her influence. And that autonomy has created an entirely new type of power. A power that doesn't come from bloodlines or coronets or centuries-old traditions. A power that comes from lived experience, emotional transparency, and cultural relevance. Meghan doesn't just represent a new kind of royalty, she represents a challenge to the very idea of royalty. And for the monarchy, that is the most dangerous threat of all. For King Charles III, the crown was never just a symbol, it was a lifelong pursuit. From the moment he became heir apparent, he waited, watched, prepared. But nothing in his decades of training could have equipped him for this moment. A monarchy in crisis, a son-turned-adversary, and a daughter-in-law who's become the most divisive figure in modern royal history. At the center of the storm is a decision that now sits on his shoulders, one that will define not only his reign, but his legacy. Should he allow Meghan Markle to be stripped of the title Duchess of Sussex? It's a question with no good answer. On one hand, the House of Lords' motion to review and potentially revoke Meghan's title is building momentum. Conservative peers are framing it as a matter of national interest, claiming that the monarchy must protect its dignity from those who use its titles to launch attacks from afar. On paper, it seems procedural. But in reality, the moment Parliament moves, the king is expected to act. Yet, for Charles, the matter is deeply personal. Meghan is not just a duchess. She is the woman who captured his youngest son's heart, the mother of 2 of his grandchildren, and the catalyst for some of the most painful moments in his family's recent history. He walked her halfway down the aisle. He smiled beside her at royal events. He once referred to her as my darling daughter-in-law. And now, he must weigh whether to publicly disown her, symbolically and politically. It is not a decision Charles can afford to make lightly. Those close to the monarch say he is torn. While publicly maintaining silence, sources inside Clarence House describe a man frustrated by the ongoing drama but also aware of the historical consequences of appearing vindictive. He knows that acting against Meghan could backfire spectacularly, especially among younger generations who already view the monarchy with skepticism. One former courtier put it bluntly, if Charles approves stripping Meghan's title, he risks being remembered not as the modernizing monarch, but as the king who punished a woman for speaking out. But if he does nothing, the pressure doesn't go away. It only intensifies. Royalists will accuse him of weakness. Parliament may advance further legislation, and the institution he now leads could be seen as passive and directionless. Worse still, inaction could be read as tacit approval of Meghan's ongoing public criticism. It's a tightrope walk over a canyon of consequences. Privately, Charles is believed to be consulting with both legal advisors and senior courtiers, exploring what options he has. The technical process of revoking a peerage is complex. It requires not just royal assent, but potentially new legislation if precedent is not clearly established. Doing so risks opening up a can of worms that could expose the monarchy to even more scrutiny. And there's another issue, precedent. If Meghan's title is removed because she damaged the monarchy, what does that mean for others? What about Prince Andrew, who remains a duke despite a catastrophic scandal involving Jeffrey Epstein and a reported financial settlement in a civil suit over sexual assault allegations? What about lesser royals who have profited from their connections in quieter ways, business ventures, public speaking, luxury endorsements? The moment Charles allows Meghan's title to be revoked, the public will ask, why her? Why not them? Insiders suggest this dilemma has consumed palace meetings for months. Charles is said to be methodical, even slow, in his decision-making, always preferring to observe rather than react. But in this case, the clock is ticking. Each day the issue remains unresolved. It fuels a public and media circus that chips away at the monarchy's image of control. Complicating matters is the emotional undercurrent running beneath the political calculation. Meghan's accusations of racism, neglect, and emotional abuse within the royal family have stung deeply. Charles, who once championed diversity and spoke openly about his desire to be a king for all faiths and all people, now finds himself portrayed as the head of an institution accused of racial and emotional coldness. Those who know Charles describe him as someone who craves harmony but struggles to confront conflict directly. He may privately seethe, but he rarely shows it. And with Harry, the pain is even more pronounced. The father-son bond, once strong, has been fractured by years of revelations, memoirs, and media grenades. Harry's public accounts of being ignored, manipulated, and even physically attacked by his brother have put Charles in an impossible position. To defend the monarchy is to risk alienating his son. To defend his son is to undermine the monarchy. And in the middle stands Meghan. For Charles, she represents a paradox. She is both the disruptor and the bridge. She is the woman who broke the royal mold, and the one who may hold the key to healing it. If he chooses to let her title stand, he opens himself to criticism but preserves a thread of connection. If he authorizes its removal, he draws a line in the sand from which there may be no return. Sources close to the palace say Charles has already spoken to Prince William about the matter. William, according to those reports, supports the title being stripped. He believes it's long overdue and necessary to preserve the institution's honor. Their relationship has also been strained, particularly since the Netflix series and Spare painted him as emotionally volatile and unwilling to defend Meghan from press harassment. But Charles is not William. He is not guided by the same instincts. While William is seen as a modern warrior for the crown, direct, decisive, protective of the institution, Charles is more inclined toward diplomacy, even delay. And this time, delay may not be an option. Public pressure is mounting. Every headline about the Lord's motion, every viral clip of Meghan's past interviews, every pundit op-ed urging the monarchy to act, boxes the king further in. And there's the international audience to consider. The Commonwealth includes nations that have criticized Britain's colonial legacy and racial history. Any action against Meghan risks igniting renewed accusations of systemic exclusion and hostility toward progress. There is also the growing question of Charles's long-term vision. He has spoken repeatedly about a slimmed-down monarchy, one focused on relevance and efficiency. But how does that vision coexist with a monarchy that appears vindictive or intolerant of dissent? Can the crown modernize itself while silencing one of the few figures who has consistently demanded change? For now, Charles waits. But he cannot wait forever. The House of Lords will not slow its process to accommodate royal hesitation. Once a motion like this gains traction, it becomes politically difficult to reverse. The monarchy is being dared to respond. And whether Charles likes it or not, silence can only last so long. And therein lies the real dilemma. Not just whether Meghan should keep her title, but whether Charles can protect both the monarchy and his family in a world where the two are no longer aligned, where institutional loyalty and personal reconciliation may be mutually exclusive. The king must choose. And whatever he chooses, the impact will last far beyond his reign. The House of Lords has moved to strip her of her royal titles, igniting a firestorm that threatens to reshape the crown forever. Meghan breaks her silence, accusing the palace of revenge, punishing her for daring to tell her truth through the Netflix documentary and explosive Oprah interview. Tonight, we uncover why this isn't just about titles. It's a battle over power, legacy, and who controls the royal narrative. Stay with us as we reveal shocking behind-the-scenes moments and what this means for the future of the monarchy.